So just before we get stuck into this podcast with the two Jeffs, which we recorded last year, Tom and I wanted to dedicate this one to Forrest Martin. To those who crossed his path, you'll know what a fantastic human being he was and what a creative, unique individual. I'll always cherish those times that I got to spend in the studio with him, the tour around Apple, which was incredible. And it's a great loss that he's no longer around, and quite shocking and upsetting as well to receive that email from Kelly. This podcast is in memory of Forrest, someone who was quite an incredible imaging producer. And as John Frost said, vital. I think that's a really nice way of putting it.
The Imaging Hangout Podcast with Darren Robbo Robertson, Adam Burgess and Tom Cross. Talking anything and everything, with a little bit of production chat thrown in for good measure. Dress code, business on top, party on the bottom.
Right, who's going to intro this one?
Go on, Robbo. It's been a while.
Well, I haven't had a chance to get to know him very well, but probably best known for his alien imaging packaging. We have Jeff Schmidt, and I'm not even sure where you're from, in the States somewhere. Jeff, nice to have you along.
Thank you. Great here. Bay Area, California.
Another, world-topping producer purely because he's Australian. Jeff Nielson, who is currently the imaging director, correct, Jeff?
Yes.
At WSFM, which is a classic rock greatest hits station here in Sydney, one of the top rating stations, number 2 or 3 at the I haven't checked out.
Number 3 last survey, but yes.
Very good.
Number 3. There you go. And also a quick g'day to a good mate of mine, Wayne Foxy, who works with Jeff doing the breakfast show.
That's it. G'day, Foxy.
Welcome along, Jeff.
Well, good day, Foxy,
Thank you.
from London as well.
I'll be very excited to hear that.
And welcome Jeff to the podcast.
Thank you very much, guys. A pleasure.
Well, let's start with where you came from. That's probably the best question. How did you start in the industry and how did you get to where you are today?
Most people start in radio like out of high school. I was like my mid-20s when I got into radio. I got in mainly because I wanted to do talk radio, or I wanted to do narrative radio at the time, because I thought that was more, I'm a musician, so it felt more performance-based than DJs playing songs or whatever. That's just the way I interpreted it at the time. But I always loved radio growing up. So when I got a chance to get in, and I got in a production room and I saw all the blinky lights, I'm like, this is like music, and they'll pay me. So like, I'll do this.
Not very much, I'm sure, but yeah.
No, it was crap.
not at that age.
No, well, but considering that I was, professionally, like I'd bounce between sales jobs and trying to be like a responsible adult and all that kind of stuff. And that stuff may be paid better, but it was just as unstable as what they warned me that radio would be. The truth is, once I got in radio, I never got fired again. Like, it was the weirdest thing. I spent 25 years in radio and never got fired.
Well, you've never worked in radio if you've never been fired. I'm sorry.
I guess I had gotten zero time in the industry.
He's just got the scoop on all his bosses. So
Yeah,
totally.
He's got the nudes.
Every once in a while.
What interests me, Jeff, is your transition from sitting behind the console in a radio studio to alien imaging, which is obviously reasonably obvious. But the next step from there is binaural audio at the moment. And that really intrigues me. How did that come into play?
So I think getting back to, like, I've always been interested in longer form narrative things. There wasn't opportunities to do that. And alien imaging was, as an imaging director, was just because I just wanted my own stuff. And then the stations I worked for were cheap. They couldn't have kilohertz, or they couldn't get the cool stuff, right? So I had to make my own. And that's how that started. And so through that,
necessity.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what I was doing, I remember specifically pulling down the original trailer for The Matrix, stripping, this is what I would do in my production room. I'd strip out the audio and just redesign it myself with my own sounds,
Nice.
right?
Nice.
And I would just do that. I wouldn't say a lunch hour. I might have killed an afternoon doing that, instead of promos or whatever. And so that was kind of always things I was fiddling with. And so when podcasts started blowing up, here at least in 2015, and it started expanding beyond kind of public radio, informational news, and doing more long form storytelling, but also you could do more drama and more fiction and things like that. That's when I started really getting into it. And once I got into that, and then it's pretty much everything headphones, then I started experimenting with spatial audio, and now I'm full, I'm a full, Dolby Atmos fanboy, and fully invested in that now. So it's been a ride, over 5 years or whatever to get there, but it's progressed a little bit at a time.
It's not the usual sort of ride I guess a producer would go on, certainly for someone who would want to dabble in the imaging side of stuff as a musician. I don't think we've spoken to anyone, certainly on this podcast, that has gone in wanting to do talk radio first.
No.
Yeah.
I think that's a first.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And my first job, truthfully, was morning. I was a producer on a morning show, which at the time was basically just answering phones and patching little old ladies to yell at the host. Right. That was my job. But one of the first things I did, which is how I ended up getting production gigs, is I would listen to the topic the dude was talking about, hear the kind of reactions, and I would record these calls and make little bits, right? I'd just run to the production studio, chop tape. This was I was on tape. It was 1/4-inch tape. Chop the stuff together, put some, music behind it, whatever was edgy, and just hand it off to the host on a cart, and he would just pop it in during a break, and he's like, "Oh, we're playing this," right? Yeah. And so that's how it got started. And then they make me make commercials and promos and things like that for the station. So I ended up just migrating that way.
Nice. And Jeff, what about you? How did you get into this crazy old biz?
Well, it's look, for me. It was I grew up in the middle of Australia in Alice Springs, which basically is literally in the middle of nowhere. It's a 12-hour drive to the nearest capital city, so which isn't in the state that I was living in, bizarrely. But so I think I grew up very isolated. So radio to me was the connection to sort of the outside world, I guess, because in the early 90s, we had one commercial TV station there in the ABC, and the radio was it. So I think that's kind of how I got my start. In fact, I remember I got really excited because there was a sort of a top hit show here called Take 40 Australia, and I remember listening to the promos. I must have been about 14 or something, and hearing all the montages and going, wow, in my nerdy 14-year-old mind, thinking, that's amazing. Can I do that at home on my cassette tape, on my cassette deck? And I remember doing that, and then eventually just moved into community radio, and then went off and did a course in Melbourne, and then got into radio that way. So and was lucky enough to, I think I spent 18 months back in Alice Springs at my local radio station there in the middle of nowhere, and then managed to get a job in a metro market pretty quickly in Melbourne. So within a couple of years, I was in a big market doing production the whole time. Though I remember sending an air check out to the guy at Triple M in Melbourne, wanting to be a jock, and the guy goes, "I love your tape, I love your edits. Maybe have you considered a career in the production room?" Righto.
Okay, not so subtle.
Those breaks had been heavily edited.
Reading between the lines on that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, at what year would this have been, and when? Because obviously, so myself and Tom know you from coming over to England to working in Bristol.
That's right. Yeah, so that was about 5 or 6, like 94, I think. 94. No, 90. End of 93. Yeah, that's when I started. So I was only 19 years old when I started in as a lot of people. I think I did a diploma course we have in Australia, which is like, a year radio school, we call it. And there was one in Melbourne at the time, Swinburne Uni, which isn't there anymore. I think it's only afters now, I think, in Australia.
That's about it.
If you want. And I think I was lucky enough to get that education because I was remote, you see. So they obviously let people in and out. They let you, what do you call it, scholarships? Yeah, because I was working remotely. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yep.
Or I was from a remote area, so I got granted this scholarship. So, 94, 95, and then 94 when I started in Alice Springs. Then 95, I was lucky enough to get a job in Melbourne pretty much straight away. So I was lucky there, but still all on tape and stuff. So
what's the station in Alice Springs? Is it 8HA? Is that it?
8HA.
Yeah.
8HA is the AM and
8HA.
And Sun FM's the FM. Yeah, and they're still there, and I still know a lot of the people there. It was one of the very last small radio stations in Australia to actually not get bought by a network. It was only last year they finally got bought out.
Wow,
by
really?
Corrales.
Independent.
Yeah.
Oh no,
yeah.
Corrales didn't get it, did he?
Yeah.
Oh
Mr.
my
Corrales.
God. Seriously.
So
this
even
is the
though
man
they
who
had a
makes
skeleton
staff bring his own toilet paper to work.
Oh, fuck.
Really?
Yes. I'm not kidding.
Are you being
I'm
serious?
not kidding. I'm absolutely serious. You've got to bring your
Wow.
own coffee and your own toilet paper.
A friend of mine was actually telling me a story. He was working for a Corella station on the Sunshine Coast a few years ago, and apparently this guy just rocked up in his paint gear, and they thought he was the painter. He was actually
Bill Corrales.
Bill Corellis, who's the manager of this thing, and he was there to do a bit of maintenance and handy work. It was cheaper to do it himself.
Absolutely.
Wow, he must be the life of a party.
must
Don't start me.
be.
Let's not go
You've
there.
got to bring the
because
booze, though.
I'll end up
Yeah,
getting
bring your own.
If we start, you go down this road, I'll end up getting legal action slapped against me if I don't shut up. So interestingly, though, Jeff, where you are now, as we just talked about, the number 3 radio station in Sydney, which is no mean feat for a classic rock station. Let's be honest. How did you sort of settle into that? I mean, it's a pretty big gig, and it's one of Sydney's best known stations. Clearly,
Yeah.
How did you settle into that and get into a groove?
Well, I think it's funny because I'd been working CHR formats pretty much the whole time prior to that, but I was also into writing stuff, so I wasn't just a producer. And I think I got recognised. I was recognised really early on that I was good at scripting stuff as well as actually producing. So, and one of the guys who was sort of one of my mentors, I guess, Scott Muller, who actually worked in the UK and was in the CD of Capital for a while in the late noughties, I think, and has run a lot of successful stations here and over in Sydney. Anyway, he was in the UK. We built up a rapport, and he was very big on not just being a producer to produce, but to also write, which I think served me now. Certainly, as I get older, and certainly with this format, it's very much a script based kind of thing, I guess. So he'd sort of remembered me. We'd done stuff back and forth for many years. I did freelance for a number of years, and we did a lot of jobs and stuff together. And then they were just basically changing the radio station and the way that it was. They'd gotten rid of a few, or they changed roles with a few key personnel. And look, I just got a call, and I was working in regional. I was a regional manager for Southern Cross at the time, and got this call saying, "Bring your bag of tricks down to Sydney. We want you." And I went, "Righto."
Nice.
Which
So who
was
gave you
great.
that call? Was that Duncan?
That was Dunks. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
was
right.
it Duncan? I can't. Yeah, it was Duncan first, and then eventually it was sort of revealed that Scott was going to be the content director there. So yeah, it was sort of like that. But really, I mean, and Scott is just an amazing writer. So it was so good to work with someone who is just, he's one of those guys that is both a really good writer, but really good on the audio side of things as well. So just really.
I was just going to say, before we go there, you mentioned your script writing, so we should play one of the bits of audio that you sent us. This one's the 80s weekend promo.
Yeah.
And it's a ripper. So let's have a listen.
Yeah,
to
some
that.
good humour.
It's
in
a
this one.
ripper.
Ripper reader.
Now, 80s soap icon Mrs. Mangles of 32 Ramsay Street.
Mrs. Mangle.
Sorry, Mrs. Mangle of 32 Ramsay Street tells us how much she loves WSFM's Totally 80s weekend.
I don't care.
But Mrs. Mangle, we're playing hits from 80s icons like Michael Jackson.
I don't care.
George Michael.
I don't care.
What about you too? Elton John. Roxette.
I don't care.
Anything else to add, Mrs. Mangle?
I won't be satisfied until they close you down.
Totally 80s. Playing across your weekend on WSFM.
That's lovely to have some character.
It's
Yeah.
nice, and
I love the humour.
The beautiful thing, the script is in itself is genius, but the thing that really puts the icing on the cake on that is the delivery from whoever that was that voiced that. It's great.
Oh, that might have been me. Yeah, that's.
Was that you?
That's just me doing a stupid voice. Yeah,
Nice. Well, there you go. Maybe you're on the wrong side of the glass.
that's what they tell me. It's that frustrated on edge.
American Jeff, how does that tickle your fancy?
Can't do the accent, I'm afraid.
Well, yeah, I was not knowing or familiar with this character. Is that like a real? That's part of the culture? Is that part of the zeitgeist?
So to set it up, Mrs. Mangle was part of an iconic 80s. Well, it's actually just wrapped up.
Just wrapped up.
Production, yeah. But it was called Neighbours, which is it was sort of like a sort of early evening soap opera show. Yeah, Mrs. Mangle was the cranky old lady that lived on the street that sort of,
Got it.
Neighbours was the soap opera that spawned the careers of, I was going to say Jason Donovan. I don't think he made it very big in America, but Kylie Minogue was the big one.
Yeah.
Craig McLaughlin.
Yeah.
So
that's it.
Yes.
And that she was a character, and I just basically pulled some audio. But the funny thing with that promo was because we'd been doing these weekend promos every weekend, and it was becoming that stock standard montage of, hey, we play this and we play that, which was just getting a bit sort of, it was like, how do you actually, do something without demonstrating the music that's actually a music-based feature? And that was kind of part of the thinking behind that, was like, right, let's not demonstrate the songs. We do that all the time. Let's do something different with it and not actually put any songs in it. And just use an 80s icon, I guess.
It's beautiful. So was that a solo effort, or was that a collab with Mike, the program, or whoever was the program director at the time?
Yeah, no, that was just me on my own. I think it was just, I had some spare time. I think because we do a lot, obviously being it's kind of the idea that was presented to me with WS is it's a top 40 station for the over 40s. So I was pulling a lot of stuff from the 80s, just a lot of audio from off YouTube and various other sources, and I found that piece of Neighbours stuff. I thought, I'll keep that for a rainy day. And sure enough, I had some time, and I just went, you know what, this is what we're doing. So
rainy days here. Yeah,
and I think that's the thing, as long as you've got the time to do this stuff, and I'm very lucky that I have the time. I think a lot of other producers are, especially producers working full time. In the industry, just churning, that's what it strikes me as. It seems there's a lot of churn, but I could be wrong.
Well, are you the sole producer for this station? There's no network responsibilities for you, so you can concentrate on.
Yeah, well, the unique thing with ARN, especially on the gold side and the heritage side, I guess, is that they don't like to network or to. We share resources, so we'll share the same promotional tactics and things like that, but. They
are you
like
free to execute those promotional tactics in a different way, or put a twist on them?
Yeah, well, we work on it, so it's just basically between. So the two brands that align the closest, because on the sort of the older side of the network, there's about 3 different formats. So Melbourne and Sydney share the music format's probably the closest, which is pretty much 80s. The bullseye 80s, we play 90s obviously and some noughties, but the bullseye's sort of an 80s audience or music format. And Melbourne align's pretty much the same. So we do have the opportunity to share a fair bit of stuff. So like for instance, this week I'm off and Jamie, who's the producer for Melbourne, he'll be producing the tactic. Lucky him. But he'll be doing it for both. So.
I don't know what it is, but it sounds brutal.
No. It's both stations at the time. We were supposed to do one last week, but it fell through. For instance, so Melbourne, so the two capital cities, Melbourne and Sydney, are aligned similarly, but Brisbane's got a different format. We've only got one station in Brisbane now. Adelaide's got a different format again, and Perth's different again. So there's not a lot of. Yeah, we like to keep stuff as autonomous as we can, and that's the beauty of ARN. They haven't gone heavily with the networking as some, at least on our side of the fence, which is great. So it gives you time.
Absolutely. And just coming back on the time just quickly, I guess coming back to that promo, you mentioned that it's nice if you've got the time to use stuff like that, but there's a bit of a trade-off there, isn't it? Because, yes, although you spend more time on sculpting the script and getting the wording just right, if you don't have to build a montage, there's actually a whole bunch of time saved in putting the piece together though, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's it. You just spent more time on the scripting and I think that's the beauty now, because there's this. I mean, it's so much easier than it was in the old days. We had to actually jump into a studio and find all the audio. You can just do it all on. You can have your word processor. You can be writing and doing the editing at the same time. It's all these synergies kind of combine, and I think once you get the good idea, the whole thing flows really quickly. So
that's interesting. Were you writing that as you were building it?
Yeah, pretty much. I think I got I think the whole thing started around the whole thing about Mrs. Mangles and getting her name wrong, Mrs. Mangles, because that was the whole. And that whole idea of just then, when we were doing Nova, so Nova back in the noughties had a very much what do you call a Jack FM kind of format, that sort of lots of kind of really tight 10-second sketches almost between the songs that. So we used to, and back in Nova days, because there was a real big branding philosophy behind it. So we had a lot of writers and a lot of producers just producing this gear. So we'd be producing 3 or 4 or 5 of these sort of sweeps like that, little promos that or whatever that might be just quirky and stupid. So I guess I kind of got my my miles up, although years and years ago, with the actual production of all of that and having to punch through, because we had to do. I think it was you had to have 2 pieces of what they used to call topical irreverence every morning that had to be on air at a certain time, and whether it went to air or not was a different story. But it kept you fresh. Yeah, well, that's right. Sometimes they were bad gags, but it sort of forced. That's why I took the job in the first place. This was
you get into a good rhythm.
Yeah. I should explain this for people that don't understand. Nova still is in Australia, but at the time was very much from a production scenario, was a very, very irreverent kind of station. The idea was you turn the dial on and the thinking of the programming is you wanted the listener to go, what the fuck was that? That was the kind of the thinking behind it. So everything had to be a little bit out there and irreverent. And was
that what it had? The tagline sounds different.
Yeah, exactly. That was all of that. Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the kind of the I guess the benchmarks was that's what we do. That's who we are. So as a writer producer, it's a real what do they call that? Jump in the deep end kind of. Scenario, because
baptism of fire.
I knew there was something about a ring of fire in that. I knew that was what I was trying
That's
to
after a curry.
I was going to say,
right.
that's after a good vindaloo. Yeah.
But they were doing things, and that's actually when I left the UK, because I worked in the UK for 7 years, and it's funny, I was always a really frustrated kind of wanting to do all the cool stuff, the cool montages, all the beat mix kind of, the really slick. And although I always wanted to do that, I always ended up falling over onto this sort of comedy, sketchy writing and producing kind of side of things. So sometimes you just got to go, you know what, I'm just going to play to my strengths.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So interestingly, Schmitty, and that's what you're going to be known for the rest of this interview, so we can discern between the two Jeffs.
Yeah, that's fine.
Was that a well, you've now got an Aussie nickname too. If you ever come here on holidays, and they say,
to be fair, when I joined a sports station in 2011 or whatever it is, they immediately called me Schmitty because they never use anybody's name, so they're just
right.
Yeah.
Don't let them call you Snitty here, though, because otherwise you'll get eaten at the local RSL on a Friday night with cheese and tomato sauce on top.
That's an in-joke. I don't get that.
Wow.
I want to play off something that Jeff was just talking about how he sort of found a groove that wasn't necessarily what he thought he would fall into. Or where he thought he wanted to go, he found a groove that sort of suited him. Is that the sort of the way things went with you? Was it sort of organic that, okay, yeah, I'd really like to do this, but my strengths are here? Or how did you end up in that sort of place?
Yeah, I think there's always kind of a push and pull. I rarely met people who knew immediately where they wanted to be and then got there and then wanted to be there the entire time, always, right? I think everybody kind of goes through some searching, or maybe they fall into something they're naturally suited for right away, which does happen, but not me. It was like I started in talk, but like pretty soon, at least in the States, that got to be a serious clown car. And then I migrated into music because my production was good enough for people to like, well, if you can do that for, talk, can you make me a U2 promo or whatever? So then I would, there was a classic rock station. So I ended up just following where there was gigs, but I was interested in alternative radio in the States. And certainly, there was stuff of that similar to what Jeff was talking about that was shticky and had like little vignettes and little comedy bits and irreverent and just kind of, what the hell's going on vibe to it. I was totally into that kind of stuff. And I really only got probably about a year and a half opportunity to do that. And then the station went country, and I ended up getting a job at an adult alternative station, which was kind of like that, just not quite. We're not going to be that irreverent. So it was always just a step away. And so it was always kind of like not quite a 100% match. And so I would pursue opportunities outside of my radio gig. And that's pretty much where all of, I think, my things that I really liked to do, I found other avenues outside of radio to do that. And then the radio thing became like, okay, this is what radio needs. These are the things I can do that radio needs. And they pay me for it. And it's pretty stable and it's a good gig. And here's all this other stuff that I do elsewhere that really, jazz. I get, it's like the sex and cash theory. It's like radio was for cash. And then this other stuff was the sex, right?
Nice.
Love it.
So what was the last full-time staff gig before taking the leap into doing your own thing?
Yeah, it was 2019. So here's the great thing. Like I had started working at home in 2015. And I was full-time radio. So that enabled me to kind of really, because I realized in radio, and if you're honest, you're sitting there a lot of times going like, wow, I have a lot of hours that are just in the course of a week getting to and from work, wasted, sitting around shooting the shit with colleagues, fun, but wasted time. And sometimes a promo might come out of that or whatever, and that was fine. But largely I was looking at, if I really just distilled the job down to what I'm doing, I have this is a halftime gig, right? And so it's like, if I do this at home, that gives me at least 6 or 7 more hours a day to do stuff that I want to do, including launching businesses and doing other kind of work. And so I experimented with a bunch of different stuff doing that. So by the time the pandemic came around, it was like, I'm already working from
You're
home.
well ahead.
Yeah. So but that station eventually ended up collapsing. Not because of me, but you could blame me if you wanted to. One of the stations I worked for ended up, they just wanted to make it a sports station and just simulcast. This is the state of radio in the States, is they took a perfectly good major market FM signal and go like, let's put our AM sports station on it because we don't have any ideas. So that's what they did. And but the funny thing was I was in Los Angeles at the time. This is a San Francisco station, doing voice sessions for a piece of fiction that we were doing. And so I was doing other work when, the general manager is calling and blowing up my phone. It's like, you have to call back. You have to call me right away. It's like, yeah, I know what's going on. You're flushing the station and I'm out of a gig, and that was fine. Was it
a relief almost?
It wasn't a relief because it's kind of like, there was a certain amount of ease to it. And I knew the station wasn't going to last for very long because what they do weren't working, and corporate was heavily involved, and that's never a good thing, right? When the corporate execs start tinkering monthly, and so it was pretty obvious what was going to happen. So I was just like, all right, I rode this gig for as long as it's going to be, and at first it was kind of like, well, I'm going to miss the gravy, but I don't need it, and now I'm outside of that a little bit, and so I still do work, occasional, freelance work or whatever. I'll do some pickup stuff when I have time. But for the most part, yeah, out of the day-to-day for since 2019.
And then into this podcasting stuff, and did you pursue that as a challenge at first, maybe because it was a little bit different, but also as a passion? You said you wanted to get into the talk stuff, so being a talk format.
Well, yeah, the kind of stuff that we were doing is like a partner of mine, Mark Ramsey, he and I, he's a radio researcher here in the States back when they used to actually do radio research. So we knew each other through radio that way. And he was on the research side, and obviously I was on the creative side. But we would have conversations like, we don't really, like, for all the people talking about radio, people using, hey, we're an audio medium. That was a thing that people really love to say. And we're like, yeah, but you're not really using audio that much. It's just, you've got a pretty narrow lane of things that you do with audio and sound. Yeah. And outside of that, you're kind of just not interested. And I understand why. I mean, I've spent my entire radio career doing commercial radio. So I know the demands that a commercial station has to, fulfill to succeed. And a lot of them are not geared towards the kind of stuff that podcasting was enabling people to do. So we had like, let's do a sound rich kind of docu-fiction thing about the making of a classic movie. And my partners was into Psycho, so we did it based on that. And for me, it was just like, I had done little things like that. You do a minute-long promo when you're being edgy, right? But to do 8 minutes, to do 20 minutes, to do 30 minutes of that was like, holy smokes. So you go from sprinting to a marathon in your kind of production outlook. And it was just a way for me, again, like I said before, just to stretch. Like, I don't get to do this on radio. And increasingly,
did you?
Go ahead.
So I was going to say, did you know? Was there without sounding sort of managementy, was there a demographic that you were looking for? Towards, we can cater. This is missing. It goes hand in hand with my passion, or was it? Do you know what? You love Psycho. I love doing this stuff. We're going to have a blast doing this together. Let's do that, and let's just throw it at the wall and see what sticks. What was the attitude going towards that?
Yeah, so it was both, right? So on the one hand, we wanted to try something that we weren't hearing, because we both kind of felt like public radio was really good at, similar to BBC, although BBC has a lot more tentacles than public radio does here, but similar in that it's news and information based, and they're really good at crafting. And they were the first in the States to take on-demand audio for longer form stories. But stylistically, it was definitely not my jam, right? It didn't appeal to me stylistically. I thought like they're leaving so much on the table with not using sound, not using music, like being afraid of that stuff. And on the commercial side, it's like we were all about using music and sound and explosions and all the things, but we didn't want to tell stories, right? We don't have time for that. Like, shut up, get to the song, get to the music, right? But get back to break, all that kind of stuff. And so we felt like there had to be an audience in between that wanted longer form story, but not necessarily the way public radio would do it, a little bit more like you'd get on television, right? And that commercial radio wasn't going to do that because the nature of the business model is just not possible. And so it was like, so we developed a pitch and a concept, and we put together a little pilot, and then we went out and pitched it, and we found this little podcast company who said yes. And that little podcast company, by the way, just last year sold for $300 million. So
wow.
Is that Wondery, is it?
Yeah, that was Wondery. Yep.
Yeah, they're massive.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
well, congrats on that.
But there was like 3 people at that company when we started that
Blimey.
deal. Yeah.
Did you have shares in it?
I did, actually. I did. I got a little taste.
Nice.
Yeah.
Woo!
It's not fuck you money, but it was
it was enough to pop a bottle of bubbly.
Yeah. It was. Yeah. As I said, that's a nice gesture. Thank you.
So I've got to ask, did you buy yourself any sweet little treats for the studio out of the money?
Well, I mean, a part of that was I knew that I was going to eventually end up upgrading to Atmos, for Dolby Atmos, to mix properly for Dolby Atmos. So that the question is, like, you can totally do it in headphones, right? Back to your point about binaural, you know, the engine can give you just a headphone feed. You can play with it on your laptop. It's not, but the proper way to do it is really to have the speaker array. So that was something I knew, but I still made a business decision about it. It wasn't like, because for me, that was like, okay, here's money I wasn't expecting. I'll spend some of it, but most of it's just going to be like for the day where I can say, fuck off, right? That's what it's the fuck off fund,
nice.
Right?
Yep.
Because I think you need that.
Fund.
Everybody needs that. And you don't have to say fuck off. But I want to be able to say fuck off.
You want the option of being able to say
that's
right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to be able to say
That's
fuck
only
off
human.
comfortably. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Or just,
fuck
just
off and live on the streets.
just to have a bit more autonomy where you don't have to take things you don't want to, and you don't have to work with people that are assholes. Like, just having that's
I do that now.
Right. Well, good. Everybody should.
Robert said fuck off 10 years ago.
Yeah,
That's
if you
right,
can do
exactly.
that and you're happy, then that's great. Yeah. But no, the Atmos upgrade was totally a business. Like, I plotted it out. Like, I kind of guessed, like, how many customers am I going to have that are going to want this? What's the timeline? What's the upfront investment? What can I reasonably expect? And it's already paid for itself. So it was completely the right move to do.
And is this all still through Pro Tools?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. You can do it through Logic. I think I knew Nuendo does it. Studio One, I don't think does, but Reaper, I think. Maybe, yeah. I mean, basically, all these DAWs are coming on with this.
So for those who are maybe a little out of the loop, binaural audio is sort of 3D audio, isn't it? I mean, you'll describe it better than me, but it's pretty much 3D audio.
Yeah, it's kind of right. I mean, but it's been around forever. That's the thing.
Yes, that's the thing. Absolutely.
It's really old tech. In fact, BBC was making binaural shows like in the 80s, I think.
Mm-hmm.
With if anybody's like seen the Neumann head picture of like that the microphone that's basically shaped like some person's head, that's a binaural microphone, and so it records sound the way we hear it because of our physiology affects how we hear things. So And that's kind of like been the standard for how people record, voiceover instruments and things like that. But it's gone quite far since then.
I guess the other thing we should add in there is it's 3D audio, but without surround speakers. You can, as Jeff was alluding to before, you can actually just put on a pair of headphones and hear this stuff in 3D, which is quite incredible.
And have that immersive experience.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's different for everybody, but yeah, I mean, like some people are really like totally immersed by it, and other people a little bit on the fence, and I'm kind of one of those on the fence. My head's a weird shape, I guess. Everybody's experience is subtly different, so it might actually not be 3D for you. That's
interesting. I've never actually experienced it. Into the technical side, obviously, a lot of these doors now can you can mix this way. Plugin wise, are there any unique plugins that just work in that field that you wouldn't use for normal stereo mixing?
Yeah, in fact, I like anytime, and there's a whole ton of them now, but basically with the advent of like AR and VR, everybody's making these goggles and content. What they realized pretty much right away was that, okay, we can fool your eyes that you believe you're in this space, but if the audio doesn't track that, if you don't actually hear sounds the way
it takes you out.
It really does. It just doesn't work. And so there's been an explosion over the last couple of years of pretty decently priced, fairly priced binaural plugins that will take a mono sound and place it in a 3D space. And there's a bunch of them now. And so like Deer VR Pro is one. Binauralizer. A lot of them use ambisonic audio, which is basically just a different way of recording. And then they just spatialize that way. So there's a bunch of them now. The Dolby system is basically their own piece of software that you just route your Pro Tools outputs to, and then you monitor from the Dolby tool, right? So you actually have to put your outputs out to this piece of software, and then you monitor from that.
Yeah, here's a question you might not be able to answer, but and this is purely self-indulgent. But a mate of mine who I met through another podcast I do, a guy called Jeff Silverman, and he's an audio engineer. He was actually Rick Springfield's audio engineer, and he's sort of mucking around remixing some of Rick's stuff in binaural audio. He's a bit like you. He's sort of found this toy and just loving playing with it. And when we were talking about it recently, we were emailing backwards and forwards, and I said to him, it'd be interesting for me to send you a promo and, get you to mix it in binaural audio. And he went, yeah, we could do that, but I'm not sure what the on-air processing would do, because it's all based on reverbs and all that sort of stuff. Am I right? He's sort of going, I'm not sure what the on-air processing would do to that by the time it got to someone's receiver on the other end. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Binaural is primarily, in fact, fundamentally, it's a headphone format. And so you're technically not supposed to play it out over speakers. Like you can, of course, and you can hear it, and it most times sounds pretty good. But it's not the same. And it's certainly, if you tried to, I know iHeart a few years ago was experimenting with that in the States with broadcast. And I don't know if they're using it or not. I've played with it over the years with promos, just added little elements. And, for me, it started off as a spice. It was never like the main dish. I'm not like going to make a spatial promo. It was always like I have a normal stereo promo. And then within this thing, maybe I want some vocals to kind of like pop out for a split second or something. Those kinds of like momentary effects can totally work. And I think those don't get crushed. But if you try to do a whole thing through that, I concur. Not going to get the result you think.
Well, we haven't played any of your audio yet, so would an interesting thing to play here be this over-the-shoulder technique of yours that I was listening to before and was quite intrigued?
Oh, wow, you got that. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought that was a little bit nerdy, but you can go ahead.
I think it demonstrates this really well, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Here we go.
I am out of coffee in here.
Aye, sir.
All right, so
can I get a cup?
When we're done, of course. Like I said, I want to keep this as simple as possible and get us both out of here.
You say that, but,
You're right. You can't really drink coffee with...
My hand's cuffed to a table.
Sitting behind glass. Can you tell me why?
Well, I could, Wayne, but it would take time. And so since I don't have to, let's just run down this list of questions real quick and get...
Sorry to interrupt, but I think you do have to. Tell me. I'm a U.S. citizen, man. I have rights. And since I haven't been Mirandized or charged with a crime or offered a lawyer, I don't think that you have the authority.
Okay, you know what? There are half a dozen ways to skin this cat.
There's a state of emergency that the governor of California declared that suspends those rights and allows for civilians to be interrogated by the military. Or we can do a deep dive into the Patriot Act and the UCMJ, and we'd find another dozen articles supporting my actions here.
There we go. Wow.
Just quickly, Adam, do you recognise one of the main voices in that piece?
I do. It's bugging me. I do, actually.
It's Hopper from Stranger Things.
Ah, gotcha. Okay.
And it's oh my God, I'm forgetting his character now. That's Jeffrey Dean Morgan from Walking Dead. Negan from Walking Dead. Yeah.
You get to work with these guys? This is something you mixed, or this is...
Yeah, I did all the sound for that series. That's 10 episodes with them and Sarah Wayne Callies and a couple other TV people.
And how do they take direction?
Actually, they're really... that crew is so amazing. I mean, first of all, David Harbour doesn't take direction. He does David Harbour. And, he's a nice guy, but he's like, and truthfully, he doesn't really need it because he does one take and then he'll do one more. And that's usually the one. It's like, yep, that we're using that one.
Right.
And I wasn't directing the entire thing. Like I would offer ideas or whatever, but Sarah was directing that. She was the writer-director on that one. But they were a really great crew because they're great at what they do, but they deferred because they're like, we don't do audio. You come onto a TV set and we're
sure. Yeah,
right, but we're here. Tell us what you need. We'll get it done, kind of thing. So it was really a positive experience.
Is it when you say David Harbour does David Harbour? I mean, I get what you're saying, but at the same time, is there an air of arrogance about that? Or is it...
Of course, yes. I mean,
Okay.
When we recorded this, he was not just doing Stranger Things, but he was also in the middle of, doing Black Widow. Right. And he had just come off Hellboy.
Oh, yes.
So
that was a flop. So that'll bring his ego back down.
Right. But it wasn't. He's just, he had an assistant, and his assistant was there, and they were handling all the things for him. So he had kind of gotten to a level now where it's like he can't deal with a lot of the little things that would totally mire your life if you got that popular or that in demand. And so he was in for 5 hours, and that's the time we got, and that was kind of it. But
fair enough.
Nice guy, but you definitely he's at a level, right? So
Sure.
you sense that for sure.
That's fair enough. Yeah, okay. So you got 5 hours with him, and how much? So how quickly? How long is an episode, and how quickly can he churn through the 10 episodes within that 5 hour period?
Well, it was actually in that one session we went through 5 episodes of content for him. We cut half the season with him that day, and then pandemic hit, so we had to cut stuff remotely. So it was like him in London. He was like locked down in London for 8 months.
He's married to Lily Allen or going out with Lily
Allen.
Yeah.
But he was also, I think, on the Black Widow thing or whatever at that point. So that was in delay. So there was that was the other thing. So everybody was delayed. So everybody's recording from different places. So I think probably another maybe 5 hours or whatever after that, remotely.
In that scenario, do you have to bounce off of each other in a recording? So if you're in a scene with someone, do you have to get everyone together on a platform to be able to do the lines, or can you go, okay, David, you do this bit, and this is how this character is going to react, and we'll chop that in later? Or
those actors, the 3 main or the 4 main actors, really need to be with their sides. That's what they call it, who am I acting with, right?
Okay.
So Sarah and David would be together, David and Jeffrey would be together, that kind of stuff. And it was whether through clean feed or sometimes if they couldn't scheduling, this thing was recorded very much like TV style. We recorded episode 10 first and then got through 3 sections of episode 4 and then moving on to episode 7. And then, it's like cutting it that way.
Okay.
And then they would use internet services and things like that, like Clean Feed, and now we would use Riverside now. But right now we're in the middle of recording season 2, so we're using mostly studios, but local records over Zoom, so people can see each other and stuff like that.
So specifically with that clip that we played, the over-the-shoulder technique was used for those dialogues. How did you kind of employ that into the audio, which obviously that's more a visual aid?
Yeah, so that's the thing I think that's probably should have I should have explained up front was that I stole that from television. Like you see this all the time in television where the camera's like you got two characters talking to each other and you've got the camera sitting on the shoulder of one character looking at the other, and then it bounces over, the shot bounces over behind the other person looking at the other character. So you can kind of bounce back and forth, and sometimes they go wide and have a third shot in there. And so it's like, I wonder in this sequence if we could do that just by the sound of each room that they're in. He's already said he's behind glass, so one of them
really set it for me at that point. Okay, and I picked it in my head.
And then it's just about pacing and like, where is dramatically the right way to cut over to David? When's it the right place to be? Do we start with this character? And for me, it was all about just reading the script and knowing in that scene, Jeffrey's character was the one in control, right? Like, so he's.
And what are you using for that on a technical level then? So is that just an EQ? You thought, I'll roll off a little bit here. I'll find some atmos of a room. Or
So it's a couple of things. I think it was definitely EQ. I think I was using speakerphone and then maybe one other reverb, and then just designing the sound of each room so that it would be distinct, so that the room sound would change when you kind of cut over. So you kind of want that hard cut sound, right?
So the room is a character in itself, so you know where you are. You're setting the scene at that point.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Speakerphone's a godsend for this kind of stuff, I imagine.
Yeah, it's super helpful. Yep. Mm-hmm.
From the smallest to the fiercest to the most fantastical, from an intimate moment to riding the wave with 100,000. The entire world. Everywhere. Anywhere. The entire universe. Everything that has ever happened.
The sound that you hear, hammers and chisels as young people take down this wall.
Anything you can imagine ever happening.
The Mars generation is here today, standing on the surface looking back at the Earth.
Every feeling. The struggle.
We lost everything. My mom and my brothers, everybody, they lost their family.
The joy.
Here comes baby. Oh, she's beautiful, Daddy.
All of it is at your command. Because we can feel it. Through our ears.
So we should come back to other Jeff, and find out a little bit more about what sort of a normal day for you. What?
Well, if you don't mind me asking, just Robert, I mean, I found that fascinating as a producer. Aussie Jeff, what was your take on that? I mean, as someone who is obviously quite script heavy within their stuff, and I know that's kind of a different perspective on it. What was your take on what we heard?
I was actually just trying to, because I'm a geek, trying to figure out how the back end of that works. So it's a stereo file. It uses phasing or something, doesn't it, to actually get that binaural thing, or is it discrete? Is it something that's like you're generating a file that's got 7 tracks in it or something, and it's playing it back and mixing it for your headphones? Like, how does that kind of side of things work? Like, if I receive the audio file or receive the stream, is that just a stereo stream that I'm receiving, or is it something that's done in software that gives me that stereo kind of thing, or the Dolby Atmos thing in my headphones? Or
the short answer is that you get the stereo experience. You're going to listen to it, over two ears. If you had it playing back on a proper setup, maybe. Then if you had multiple speakers, they populate those speakers. That's the cool thing about Atmos, is it will dynamically deliver to whatever system the user has. So if you're on headphones, it's going to give you this. If you have headphones that'll give you Dolby Atmos, it'll play that mix. If you have headphones that just play stereo, it'll just give you the stereo version. If you have 5.1 in your living room or your Sonos soundbar or whatever, it'll give you the mix that populates that device. So that's kind of like the super promise of Atmos, is that it mix it once and it dynamically expands to or contracts to whatever the playback system is at the end user's
That's
level.
incredible.
Yeah.
Right. That's what I was thinking, because I was wondering how that worked, whether you had to do separate mixes for stereo and mono.
No, that's great. And you can do the whole thing, and you can deliver stems. I know it's not a thing that radio does, but in my work, I'm always you have to deliver stems, like, and especially now that podcasts are international, there's a lot more international. So I'm having to go back to older series I made and break out stems in different ways for international teams, because they're going to do the Chinese version or they're going to do the Latin American version.
Of course. Yeah.
Wow. And so it's getting very much like television in that way.
That's great.
Well, it's funny you said stems, because I'm finding increasingly now I'm using stems just to send other people in the network, so at least they can easily tag and stripe things. So
yes,
it's funny. For a number of years now, I've had stems set up in my main thing, just to make life a lot easier with radio.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, that's mine and Tom's production service. I mean, really, that's kind of what it is.
Absolutely.
It is. It's stems of drums, of mix outs, of vocals.
Mix outs, right. Yep,
mix outs essentially.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We should probably play some more audio, shouldn't we?
Well, we should. We should actually have a listen to something else. Let's go back to Jeff.
Aussie Jeff.
Yeah,
Aussie Jeff.
Here we go.
Aussie
Here's another one that took my fancy when I was listening through these last night. I won't even tell you what it is.
Here we go again.
AART.
What?
Happy, joy. We've set the station to random.
Don't touch my records.
The Party Playlist
On WSFM.
Now, for somebody who got into the scripting side of things because they weren't beat mixing wasn't their thing.
There's your beat mix. Yeah.
Please explain. Please explain.
That was just me. That was me going, yeah, I can do some of that stuff.
Are you scratching an itch?
Yeah, it's a Take 40 beat mix.
It is the beat mix. Well, that was the thing, because there's always got to be an element of stupidity in there. That's the thing with all of that stuff. So that's why I try and match grabs and make it all sound a bit, not too cool, I guess. But that was a throwback that was actually a throwback. A mate of mine put down the gauntlet a few years ago, and when I first started in radio, what I was known for were these stupid little outer breaks and ins of breaks. That's how I got my metro, my early gigs, and they were those sorts of things, lots of grabs and samples, and it was the way that you threw them together to sort of tell a different story, I guess, to recontextualize stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a certain style that I did when I first started, and me and a mate said, "Can we recreate that now?" 25 years ago, and there happened to be a show that obviously, which was that show that I was building at the time, and I thought, why don't I just see if I can make a few openers and try and remember how I used to do it, and that was sort of how that came up. So yeah,
nice.
Beep.
But there's nothing simple about that, though. I mean, you can't take anything away from it.
But I think that's the thing, because there's so many people doing that stuff. I don't know. It's technical, and I think that's the thing you want to. I guess part of the thing for me is that I've wanted to always make sure I understand my Pro Tools and my technical skills well enough that then I can tell the story easily.
Yeah,
I mean, that's not a story; that's just an opener thing. But you can throw things together, and you're not just thinking about the technique. I guess you're sort of seeing above that, and that's kind of, I guess, what I've noticed as a producer later on in life. I've figured out the technical well enough that I can just sort of throw things together, and the tech's not stopping the creative side, I guess.
It's interesting in terms of what Schmidt is talking about, is that the tech actually plays a big part in what we do, really. I mean, if you don't understand the tech side, it's really hard to get the results you want.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I don't know whether as you get older you just sort of you go back and day more, but I notice a lot of the younger people coming up don't sort of have those. Or I think maybe it's an Australian thing. We don't seem to have as much, and this could be perceptual totally. From my perspective, there's no sort of one-on-one kind of guidance. People are picking things up a lot online, but there seems to be less sort of. I got mentored by a production manager, who then taught me the ropes. So maybe there's sort of less of that now. So less of the technical stuff.
But that's why, sort of going back to what you were saying, Schmitty, I feel weird saying that. For someone who had such a musical, well, I say musical, I don't know what your musical upbringing was, but knowing how musical you are, to have such a curiosity about talk radio, I find quite funny. I thought you'd instantly want to go to the.
Yeah, it was about performance, because I would hear people on the radio and I would notice right away, like these are performances.
Yeah,
like this is someone that's performing. This is theater, and that to me felt like getting on stage and playing an instrument. It's like, well, I wonder if I could do that.
Interesting.
That's really that was kind of the connection. That was the DNA I was going after. It wasn't because and certainly once I got in, I realized that this is not what I want to do. But
is that a question that you ask yourself a lot, even still these days? I wonder what would happen if, like, do you still use that in your career now? Like, in terms of even day-to-day stuff, like when you're working on stuff, I wonder what would happen if I used this plugin instead of this, or I wonder what would happen if I put the mic here instead of there. It's because it's a powerful question, isn't it? What if given what we do?
I mean, for me, there's time where you would just experiment and play for the sake of it. And so Alien Imaging was that stuff was born out of just me having time and a desire to want to make stuff and figure stuff. It's like, what if I do this? What if I do that? So it was totally about that. Mm-hmm. But then there's times where like you're working, and so like all my stuff is client work now. So now it's like I get the project, and sometimes you have to solve problems that you haven't solved before. And then
it becomes difficult when the question becomes not what would happen if I did this, but what would the client think if I did this?
Yeah, I mean that's been a thing like that. Yeah, that can get into your head too, and totally psych you out if you let it. It's hard to deal with sometimes, but sometimes you're just confronted with a thing like, I've never done this before. What if I try what I think I'll do, and then you come on, maybe it doesn't work, and then you have to try a bunch of other things.
What about you, Jeff? Do you use what if?
I look
like not consciously, but subconsciously.
I think sometimes you kind of go, oh, if I done it this way or that way, but I guess I made the moves especially when I was younger. I was very undisciplined, so as soon as I got bored with something, I just move on to the next thing. So there was never a what if in the early days because I just go and do it. So the next thing, whether it was
that's the naivety,
or not,
isn't it? That's right. But then
get out of your head.
There's something nice about that as well. That's right. Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that was for me. It was just a matter of just jumping in. I think in recent years, I wish I did jump around to a lot of different stations. There's part of me thinking if I'd have stayed in one place earlier on, maybe my life would have, or my work would have been a different thing. But I mean, half the reason I moved around is because I love moving. I love seeing the world. So I guess. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that, Jeff. How did you find working in the UK compared to Australia? Because as Adam touched on it earlier, you were in Bristol a similar time to the three of us, really.
Yes. Well, the first thing I realised was a lot of the swear words are different.
Fuck, really?
Yeah. Oh,
that one's universal, mate. Don't worry.
Yeah, that one's easy. There's certain words as an Australian I didn't realise you're not supposed to say.
Well, see you next Tuesday.
Look, yeah, other things like that. Yeah, the unsavoury greetings that Australians might say to each other. But look, I think I guess I was always focusing on the similarities rather than the differences. I think, but Australia's totally is different in many ways to the UK. But I think we share the same story. I guess except for the last 50, 60 years or 70 years, I guess we were, Australia was considered ourselves very much a British part of the British Empire. So, yeah, I don't know. I think, but as far as radio goes, I think, there was definitely a different approach. And I was there at a time when a lot of Aussies were moving over, had moved over from Australian radio and somehow working.
Yeah, it's a big wave, wasn't it?
Yeah, there was a big wave through the early 2000s, wasn't there?
Yeah.
And I sort of was just on the back of that. But I know that there was tension and friction between the different ways we operated. I think Australians, and I don't know if you guys remember Link Kelly, who was a production manager and a wonderful bloke.
Of course, he hired me.
Yes, that's right. But I just remember there was certainly a difference of tone with some of the British guys when heated discussions over technical issues or whatever with various departments were raised. I think, there was... It was a kind of a bit of a retraining process. You can't basically tell someone to fuck off.
Why?
Got to be a little bit more diplomatic in England.
Shove it up your
that was exactly. Diplomacy was one thing, but there's certainly a different attitude. I found Australia to be, and I guess because I was young, but coming to England was refreshing. There was a bit of a level of sort of cowboyism in Australia, I think, in radio. And maybe there is to a bit as well, sort of that I don't know, I call it dick swinging. That I didn't see that as much, or maybe it was just different and I couldn't sort of see around it. But it certainly didn't feel as prevalent in English radio. Everyone seemed to be a lot more supportive, I guess, and there was a little less ego, I guess.
I think definitely back then, yeah. Because you, I think I took over from you at Vibe FM when you left to go back to Australia.
That's right. Yeah. When I ran off to, because that was the thing, because I basically, I think you get to a certain age when that was supposed to be a 12-month, let's go and do a bit of backpacking and see the country and see Europe, as most young Australians seem to do. Always go to England as a base and then go over to Europe. And it sort of turned into a 7-year voyage. And I got to a point where I was like, you know what? If I don't go home now, I'm never going home. So I kind of had to take the plunge and get back to Oz. But that was the funny thing. It was all that script writing stuff that I wasn't doing at Vibe really that got me the jobs back in Australia, which was funny. So I wasn't doing any of that stuff on air. I wasn't actually writing or doing comedy or sketches at Vibe, but I was sort of doing all that in the background and sending it back to Australia.
Oh, great.
And that's sort of how I managed to get the gig with Nova, which obviously wanted that guy that could write, say stupid things and write stupid things and produce stupid things. But I don't know what that means.
Well, at least
you know,
know your strengths, though, mate. That's something to be said about that.
Well, that's when I realised, look, learn to your strengths. Yeah.
Well, clearly that they are strengths if they're hiring you on it.
Well, that's the thing, and I've always gotten hired, and I've always wanted to be the guy that could get hired for doing all the the mashups and the beat mixes and all the really cool stuff. Never got a gig from that. Always from the stupid.
Yeah. See, I sit here with a bit of envy because I do like to write my own scripts, but I do struggle with the stupid stuff because my stupid stuff is just stupid. But and that's the real art to it is for it not to sound stupid.
Having to craft it. And I think that was such a great thing with Nova 100 in Melbourne and obviously the Nova Network at the time, championing that irreverent stuff and the sketch-based and all the little sweepers being, fun. I mean, the amount of pressure, I guess, we'd put us, but good pressure, but pressure we'd put ourselves under because you would have to, that was the first challenge. You get in at 8, go through the papers or internet or whatever was available, and you'd have to smash out a couple of irreverent sweeps, and everything kind of had to have a level of that. So And if it is too random, then basically it doesn't go to air, or it's do it again, or let's try something different. So it was a real sort of sweatbox in a way, but it certainly honed those crafts, that sort of craft, because you're always getting feedback. I think that's one thing. That's the great thing about working there, and the great thing about radio, if you can get it, is getting as much feedback as possible. I certainly had that, and that makes you better at what you do because it's not just your opinion; it's actually. It's not just the way you make it, then other and it taught me how to deal with critique as well, I think, So
you're talking about getting other people's opinion at the writing process or once it's on the air?
Well, I'd always produce. Well, I'd write, then I'd produce it into audio, and then I'd send that across for approval or whether it went to air or not after that. So it'd always be kind of the finished product because I think the way that I've always worked is it's fluid. You write a bit, then you and I always had a microphone, so I'd voice guide tracks and voice it myself right next to the desk. So you're doing sort of both processes at once. Yeah. And I think that's where digital's allowed you to do that, digital technology. Yeah. Digital. Sorry, I was watching Alan Partridge the other night. So, but yeah, it's. I think that's having that, going through that sweatshop for about 2 or 3 years really taught me how to do both and to know what ideas are going to work. And also, there's an element of rinse and repeat, like that Mrs. Mangles promo that I did. I've done that, many times in different kind of guises where you just take, someone's thing out of context,
Yeah. So you're not plagiarising your own work, are you, mate?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a remixed, Robbo.
It's a remix.
It's the story of my life.
We should play one more, I think. We should play the Reebok sweep because I think that was yeah, it's silly, but it's funny.
Reeboks, here we go.
The 80s, the decade of Reeboks and Ewoks.
Hey guys, I can't get my foot into this Reebok.
For the love of George Lucas, that's not a Reebok.
West FM.
Very nice. Very silly, but very nice.
Yeah, such fun.
That's the stuff. And that's the joy of doing radio because you can still just use whatever sounds and things you want. And allegedly it's covered with the broadcast license. So Star Wars grabs. Allegedly. No one's stopped us yet, but they probably will one day.
It won't be far away. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Over to you, Robbo. You were saying about the Simple Minded promo.
Oh, yeah. Well, let's have a listen to it first because I really enjoyed it. Hang on. Here we go.
Don't you forget about me. Don't.
Countdown. And will that song win you $1 million? WSFM's $1 Million Countdown.
$1 Million Countdown.
It's the only countdown anywhere in the world where every single song could win you $1 million.
Weekdays from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m.
Only on Sydney's 101.7 WSFM.
Nice.
That's a lot of songs.
That's a lot of songs.
Yeah.
There's something that strikes me in there is that the samples of K-San and Dancing Queen and all that sort of stuff are clearly slowed down. Where did that idea come from? Because that's sort of counterintuitive to what you do in a promo, right? You're sort of looking for the upbeat, catchy bang, 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 and you've gone the complete opposite, flip that on its head.
I think it was just for time. I think it was more a case of just trying to jag, and that was my boss actually. It was Scott at the time who actually wrote that. That was trying to get so it goes Dancing Queen, and then the Queen's actually Queen saying from Killer Queen, so it's kind of building sentences out of stuff. I think the focus is kind of more on that. So you want to stretch things out, and I guess in that context, you want to make everything fit. Let's stretch things out, not just for the beat, but for intelligibility too. Mm-hmm. So if you can slow, I actually find that doing editing a lot, even with dialogue, and even just doing best of recording with jocks, just stretching words out for edits and tightening things up. And I use pitch and time, but not on and I'll use it really extremely. But not on whole words. I'll use it on consonants or little vowels or bits and pieces. And I think I learned that from doing all those sorts of montages. That's nice. You can actually make things more intelligible. Certainly for a promo, if you're recutting something that the morning crew's done or something like that, you need to get the gag out, but you might have to cut something off. So I find you might want to slow the last syllable, the last word down by 50%, but then keep the S, bring the S in for something else or whatever. But yeah, using those sorts of techniques for clarity, I guess. Yeah, nice. More so than just beat, because that's the funny thing. Yeah, for vibe, because that's the funny thing I've learned over the years is that you focus on the vibe and focus getting everything right, but then you hear that stuff back on air a few days later or a few years, and then you go, I can't understand any of that. So it's trying to because it's too busy. So it's half of my it's trying to figure out ways of making everything stick out and the ear catching everything, I guess.
It's sort of that luxury of time, though, too, because there is that trick that your brain plays on you. And it's the one that I always come back to is, adjusting the compressor for half an hour and then realizing that it's bypassed. Because your brain will play tricks on you. Your brain will go, that. And I find that's the same thing with what you're talking about in terms of you sit there and you focus for an hour and a half putting something together and you go, that sounds really great, because your brain's gone, okay, I know what it is and I know it's there and I'll make you understand it. But then you go away and you have a sandwich and you come back and you go, who's been fucking with my mix?
Yeah.
So
well, I think that's the thing that I was taught really early on is if whenever possible, listen to your mix the next day or do your promo. And I try and do that now. I make sure that I'm listening to stuff when it's back off air, because you have half of the it works the other way too. Something that you think's really crap, you've smashed out in 5 minutes that needs to go on air, and then you hear it back and you a few days later and you go, well, that actually came out really nicely. Yeah. So it's that objectivity, isn't it? It's trying to be objective, and I think that's
giving your brain a break.
Yeah, but I think the only way of improving with that is actually all that feedback. Give yourself loads of feedback. Go back, listen to stuff off air, listen to things again, so that you can kind of figure out how it works after the fact, rather than going, oh, geez, I stuffed that up. But at least you can, if you hear it and say the event might have gone, but it's always just critiquing yourself so that you can get better for next time, I guess. It sounds a bit cliched, but
yeah,
it's good advice.
Well, it's the same as listening to other people's work as well. That's right, and listening to what they're doing.
Absolutely.
And what's their sound? What do you like about their sound? Yeah.
Jeffs, both of you, who would have been a producer or a production style that would have influenced you in your imaging infancy?
I'll go. The guy's name was Matt Wolf, and I think that was his name, and he did. In the United States, there was the Z-Rock network, which was the brainchild of consultant Lee Abrams. Lee Abrams, his claim to fame was he invented kind of progressive radio in the 70s and became a big consultant in the 80s and launched basically active and kind of chart-topping rock stations all across the country. So he was kind of a big deal. And then he thought that the metal audience was underserved, so he launched a metal network on AM radio in the States, and it actually picked up a bunch of stations. And then it transitioned over to FM, and in the early '90s, it actually transitioned over to alternative because basically everybody was playing alternative in the '90s. And the production on that station was crazy, weird, and good. And I got to meet the guy once because I did actually interview with Lee Abrams years ago to go work at XM, and they weren't paying anything, so I didn't take the job. But I got to meet the guy and just tell him, like, dude, I have literally stolen so many of your bits and just stolen pieces of them. Yeah, so he was like the first one for me, Matt Wolf.
Now, many of these exhibits are 18 million years old, so please don't touch. I said don't touch. All right. Recently, this stash of Xerox stuff was unearthed near the sacred space noodle of the Northwest Quadrant.
I can't even spell it.
This exhibit shows Xerox posters, patches, tapestry stickers, and over here, a rare find, a Xerox sticker sheet. Notice they all look the same.
Do you have a map?
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Huh? Do you know what this is?
No.
Historians say this is a Xerox guitar pick.
Big one.
Now, Xeroxers of that era supposedly wore these as a dietary supplement to their profuse musical indulgence.
Is that all they had? Wow.
And these made keen facelift wedges, too.
Scrape it up. Yup. What's that?
We do not know what that is.
But there's that. Look at that.
We're not sure what that is either. Now, this is a Xerox keychain weighing approximately 2.2 pounds. If you'll deposit 50 cents, we'll continue the tour.
Yay! Right. Yacht today.
Xerox stuff. Available where available.
Wait a minute, Jeff. You're saying you got paid for doing radio imaging, is that right?
Well, that part I can't help you
How
with.
do I do that?
I don't know if they're doing it
You still
anymore.
haven't worked it out.
No.
They might have rescinded that.
Oh, okay. Right. I don't feel so bad now. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Right. Jeff N.
Aussie Jeff.
I think Jeffin. No, I think it's the same thing going through. It was weird listening to all that stuff in my little radio station in Alice Springs. I think got me onto some contacts, and it would have been the work that Scott Muller, who I was talking about. He was kind of one of my really early influences, I guess. Mm-hmm. I would say that his work would kind of influence me. It's certainly in my early years. There was Matt Nikolic, who was also doing a lot of really hot stuff at Australia syndication, and at Fox FM, and to this day I'm still inspired by him because
he's
some
very
of the
clever.
stuff he's produced over is just amazing. When you want epic, those sorts of back in the day, those big epic, huge driven station promotional tactical stuff that he does is just out of control. It's mental.
Melbourne. Summer as we know it is about to change. We've got 5 of the world's biggest stars.
Since you've been gone. Hey, what's up, y'all? This is Kelly Clarkson. You belong with me. Hey, Australia, this is Taylor Swift. Hi, this is Lily Allen. Hey, this is Lady Gaga. I want to take a ride on a disco stick.
This is Rob Thomas.
This is how our heart breaks.
In Melbourne, for 5 of the world's best concerts, Fox FM's 5-Star Summer will give you access to see all of them live.
Fox FM's 5-Star Summer.
Giving you access to the biggest and best gigs this summer. Monday morning from 9 on Melbourne's #1 hit music station, 101.9 The Fox.
And a lot of that early Triple M in Australia in the 90s, it was pretty cool. I guess again it was probably alt rock. Was that sort of the beginning of that sort of world journey? I guess it wasn't as alt rock as what you'd have in the States, but there was a lot of that attitude-y kind of stuff that had attitude and punch and thinned out EQs with VOs sounding nonchalant, that sort of stuff.
So the other question that I guess comes, because we sort of should get to the point where we're starting to wrap this up, but I guess the other question that comes every episode, Tom, it's your little baby. Do you want to pose it?
Well, the plugins question. It's the oldest question, I think, from this podcast.
It's the obvious one.
It's the obvious one, but it is: what is your go-to plugin? What plugin are you comfortable with, and why? Yeah, why do you love going back to it, and what nuggets can you share?
Oh, so many plugins. I'll just jump in here. I would say Pitch and Time seems to be the one, and I know you can do a lot of stuff in Pro Tools that isn't that Pitch and Time used to do, but I still use that I reckon that's my daily go-to plug-in for all sorts of things. Again, like I was
Do you know
saying,
how many people give that answer?
We get that answer a lot.
Serato must be rolling in cash.
Yeah. They never made one plug-in for
Yeah, it's not a cheap one either.
Yeah.
I do get it.
Yeah.
I think that's the one that sits in my mind that I'm always opening up and using. And then I guess the stuff that you use. I tell you, for the mastering, the Mac DSP is currently my favourite. What's that? The DL? I can't even remember what it's called because it just sits in my master bus.
Okay.
What is it? It's a Mac DSP thing that one of the guys, Mitch Calladine, was using, who does all the KISS stuff for United Arab Emirates and different places around. I can't think.
Virgin.
Anyway,
Yeah.
Virgin. That's the stuff. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah,
Is it the NL4000?
NL4000. That's the one. Yeah. I've taken to using that in the last few years because just to get those mixes punchy without being too squashed, I guess, on air.
Yep.
One of the things I noticed, our radio station, at least our processing is really, really harsh. So I wanted something. And the funny thing with the processing was that the louder that the louder you try to pump stuff in, the softer it would sound on air. You know, it's the classic 101 stuff. But when everything's crunchy and everything's tight, you need to actually have a lot less processing. So I use that. Use that a fair bit now, and it seems to sound like cut through on air. So,
well, we had that with Kiss 100 in the UK. They actually decided not to master their promos because the mastering on the Optimob is so hard. They just let it all get done there.
Yeah.
Wow,
I always found
how interesting. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, I always found that you can use compression to kind of just glue it to get like a gentle glue. But the creaming stuff, like I once I figured that out, stuff started popping out like way easier, just letting up a little bit. Totally.
Yeah.
So Schmitty, what's your go-to plug-in? What's the one that you probably don't end up a day without using?
I tell you what, give us a favourite and then give us a more modern one, or
left field.
Might not be modern, but one that is, I guess, fun.
Oh well, the funnest thing I've played with so far is sound particles, and so basically what they do is they created a spatial panner. So you can pan across, I have 14 speakers, so I can pan a sound across 14 speakers, but you can pan it with your phone, right? So you point your phone at a speaker and the sound goes there, and then you move it up to the upper right hand channel, and you can basically do your 360 panning.
Nice.
No, it's not. It totally works. It's a little convoluted. It's a little convoluted.
That's awesome.
Okay?
No, but it's fun.
I'm not saying it doesn't work, but do
fun.
you really need to do it with your phone? That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I just sit there and spin in my chair. And then I can move
you asked the
around
question, yeah.
The thing, here's something that occurs to me. Does as opposed to a sort of a hard pan where you're drawing a straight line? I want to use the word natural, but it's probably not the right word. But does it make it sound a little more believable, natural, not so robotic, blah blah blah, when you're doing all those sort of panning moves?
Atmos does that. Atmos uses spatial coding so that you're not pointing to. You can point to a speaker location, but it's representing it as a coordinate within a 3D space rather than say 5.1 or 7.1 surround, where you're pointing it at exactly that channel, right? So that's what they call by object-based sound. So it's a lot of tricky algorithm-y stuff going on. So it does actually feel, and it can feel weird too, but it can totally feel much more realistic about where things are placed.
So interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's very cool.
So that's kind of like the weird, but like a lot of the stuff I'm using, I mean, it's all the basic tools are kind of the stuff that are part of my daily kit. It's like what has filtered into my life that it was never really part of my life in broadcast radio was noise reduction. And I basically own every noise reduction plugin made because I feel like most of them do one thing really good, but you always find some piece of audio, especially since pandemic, where you're getting stuff that's coming from all kinds of situations. So, I've got like 5 things that will de-room voiceover, right? Because people cut stuff in closets.
Yeah.
Have you played with Clarity?
I don't like Clarity. I got it.
Really?
Yeah.
You're the first person I've heard say that.
I actually find it doesn't, most of the time it's not delivering the result I can get with other stuff that I have.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
There you go.
I thought it was going to be better, to be honest, because I watched a load of videos on it, and then when I tried it, it just took off. It took way too much away. I couldn't get that desired sound.
Yeah. No, I felt the same way. Yeah.
Yeah. The go-to one for me is, do you use Descript Studio Sound? Have you tried that?
I've heard about that.
That's the online one, right?
I've heard about that too, yeah.
So it runs as a separate application. It has an online engine, so you run. It's essentially for voiceovers, but you can apply it to.
And we find it's better than the RX stuff.
Yeah,
it's a clear.
Really.
So it removes any background noise. Obviously, the more aggressive the background noise, it's going to make the audio sound not as clean. But I'm finding it's the best one out there so far.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But there's a blend sort of knob too, isn't there? So if it is really harsh, you can sort of start backing it off a touch.
Yeah, you've got a wet and dry mix. Yeah.
Actually, on that, I was going to say just one more very, very quickly. Well, now you said when you said plugins you use every day, one I pretty much almost use every day is that the RX9 Music Rebalance in the RX. That's just crazy. Just if you need for quick and dirty stuff, if you just need to kill a vocal for one, kill the music for one, a couple of seconds or whatever. Or I've actually been building full beds with that for jocks, just pulling out the voice.
Yeah, get instrumental loop,
especially of 80s stuff, it seems to work, yeah. Just for real quick and dirty rather than, flicking, having to, fossick through YouTube trying to find the right
just for samples and stuff. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm loving that.
Nice.
So that's I use that for all sorts of things.
Nice, that is a good one, absolutely.
And so, Jeff, what's a day-to-day plugin that you couldn't live without?
Oh, the Fab Filter suite is probably the one that's on.
Yes, I'm with you on that.
Yeah,
Pro Q3 all day, every day. It's on everything.
On point. Their compressors are great. It's just across the board.
The limiter is fantastic.
Yeah, because I need true peak on all my stuff. So
Well, one while we're on the subject, one that I've had for a while and I'd sort of dabbled with, but I'm using more and more is Ozone. I've been playing with that a fair bit, and just sort of different incarnations of it. Like multi-band compression, take that out. Next time, try something else, blah, blah, blah. I'm sort of loving that at the moment. It's my new toy. So there. So one more for me then, that's sort of my, I won't say weekly because it's so random when this show comes out, but my go-to question, because something that's sort of close to my heart is all about creativity. I'm wondering if you guys, like, in terms of creativity, when you have ideas, do you write them down? Do you store them in your phone? And where do you have those ideas? Do you make time for your creativity? Do you set a time to write scripts or think about how you're going to set up for the next record or whatever? Or do you just sort of take it on the run? How do you work that way?
Yeah, when I was doing imaging, there was definitely part of the day that I would put aside for that, whether it was just brainstorming just to kind of build the catalog of stuff that you could draw on, even if it might have been inspired by daily events and it might have ended up on the air, but a lot of times it was just brain dump. And then I would have just a catalog of ideas, and then there would always be that time where you need to bake something and you're stuck. It's like, well, what about that time, all those times where I had enough ideas and now there's like 2 or 3 in here, right? So I kind of did that. I had a little habit like that going on when I was in radio. A little bit different now because I'm not writing specifically, on a daily basis that way. So creativity takes more of a, it's just more ambient. Yeah.
And Jeff, what about you? Script ideas and stuff, is that just as it comes?
Yeah, bits and pieces. I think I use actually OneNote, and I'm a bit of a demon for organising my thoughts. So if I have an idea or whatever, I'll jot it down. It gets jotted down and then filed away under certain things like sweeper ideas, irreverence, topical. I just throw it in there. And then the other thing I do as well is I do actually allocate some time to write. And even if it's stuff that's not on air, I'll give myself 3/4 of an hour to just bash out some ideas. And then again, same sort of thing, put them away, let them marinate. We've only got, I guess, with our radio station, there's about 5 or 6 different things that creativity can point to, so you just where your ideas can go to, so they kind of just get filed into that, and then I pick it up. And also, even funny thing with OneNote is what I'm tending to do now is if I hear something online, I'll quickly capture it in Audio Hijack, and then I'll just drag that file into the workbook so that I can use it. Nice. So I've got that for later on. So the sound ideas are part of the notes, I guess.
That's cool.
Yeah, nice. There's actually a thing called Pocket too, which is pretty cool.
Yep. Yeah, I use that actually. offline, isn't it? It's good for offline browsing.
Yeah, you can just dump web pages or anything in there, really, and just come back to it later.
Yeah, right.
It's very nice. And you can have it on your phone as well.
And Schmitty, are you still doing effects regularly? Are you still doing the alien imaging library, and you still pumping that out?
No, that's on hiatus. Has been my MO over the years. Is I pump it for a few years, then I vanish. I'm it's been on hiatus. Okay. I think pretty much since 2019.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, truthfully, that as a business had a moment, but truthfully, it's just not lucrative enough to really spend time doing it because it's not part of a service. It's not a service, and services are what stations really need now, and they don't need a package of effects.
Do you enjoy it, or did it burn out for you as well in a creative sense? Do you feel like you...
Well, yeah. I mean, I made decisions, and we don't need to get into those, but where I had to make stuff constantly, and I totally burned out.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. Can imagine.
We pretty should wrap it up there, guys, because
I was going to say,
it's been fantastic, really, really interesting, and
very insightful.
Yeah, I've loved this. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Well, it's great catching up with you guys again. It's been so long.
It has, too long.
Yeah, sweet.
So listen, let's wrap this up this way. What piece of advice, and it can be about anything, creativity, lifestyle, whatever.
I would say. It's actually radio, basically, whether it be on air or whether you're a personality or whether you're in the production room making promos. It's all about storytelling. So if you can focus everything through that lens, no matter what it is, and learn about storytelling and how to tell the story, whatever story it is, whether it be a 30-second commercial or something a lot more significant, that's the focus that I'd use. For anything.
Nice.
Yeah, it's great. I like that.
It's very unique. Absolutely. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
Cool.
And Schmitty?
I probably would have asked, why are you interested in radio? That would be my first question. And not in an antagonistic way, just genuinely I think mostly for gauging for that curiosity. Well, what is it about it that attracts you? Because there may be other places, if it was a young person just starting out, there may be other avenues that can scratch that itch that actually have, 10 or 15 years ahead of it for you to have gainful employment and opportunities and all that. Whereas I'm not quite sure radio would be that, truthfully. And so I would say, what is it about that you're looking at? If it's genuinely I want to work at a radio station, I want to sit behind a console, then fine, right? That's legit and that's honest, and you respect that, and then you guide them from there. But ultimately, just to step back, and it's there's a lot of media now, right? Tons of media, and a lot of these things can scratch itches that might have more longevity. So just really question, what it is that you're attracted to, and follow that. And it might be in radio, and it might be radio and television, or radio, television, YouTube, and Insta, and all the places, right? So
wise words.
Very sensible.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure to talk to you both. It's been really inspirational.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's honored, and great to meet you, other Jeff.
Absolutely.
Great to hear your stories and your life.
Thank you. Likewise. Very enlightening.
Thanks, guys.
The Imaging Hangout Podcast with Darren Robbo Robertson, Adam Burgess, and Tom Cross. Talking anything and everything. Want to join in the conversation? Just message one of the guys.